Hey guys, Mouse here again. So I've been receiving a lot of questions regarding the best compositions for Ruby, so I decided to just kind of make a guide to help you decide. This is going to be applicable no matter what level of weapon advancement you may have. I'm going to start by sharing with you my own understanding of this very interesting weapon and my thought process when testing out team compositions. Just a bit of disclaimer, although I have played Ruby for a good number of hours using different levels of character progression, this is only based on my own experience. Still, I do hope that you'll find the information here useful. So, let's begin. First of all, let's take a look at her stats. This might actually mislead some people to think that Ruby is automatically a shatter unit because of the high 11.5 shatter and the low charge at 8.0. Of course, she can deal good damage against shields. But the question is she actually the better option for that role? It depends on a case-to-case basis. But overall, the stats here don't really tell us everything. Next thing I usually check are the attacks without the advancement. Attack multipliers are relatively high, so she can surely deal good damage. Dodge attack kinda helps with control via the taunt mechanics and helps the team a bit with her awakening trait. Her skill, Sparkling Collider, is both buff and debuff, and also deals huge damage via the ignite mechanics, which deals additional damage based on the remaining burn damage that the enemy is yet to receive. Same thing with her discharge, huge attack multiplier at 750% plus the ignite as well. So from here we know that she has buff, debuff, control, and damage. Now at A1, basic attack would increase and skill cooldown will be reduced. These upgrades will mostly just further strengthen what she already has at A0. And at A3, it will be another damage increase and additional multiplier for the ignite. From here we can see that the focus of her advancements from A0 to A1 to A3 are mostly on damage output. And we also know that at this point, she still doesn't have that charging capability of an on-field DPS. It is still painfully slow. However, we can already see that there are a lot of potential combinations for her. For instance, King, a fire element attack type shatter weapon, which I believe is currently one of the best options to put Ruby with. He can deal a lot of damage, he can shatter, gives damage buff at higher advancements, and also enables Ruby's discharge and skill with his 15 seconds burn damage. So for this, we probably want someone who can both deal damage and charge, a true on-field DPS. For the choices here, kinda depends. Maybe a Cobalt B or a Huma, they're both fire with good damage and charging, or maybe even Samir or Tsubasa. So far, I have only spent much time playing it with Huma and Cobalt B, and they both work well with the composition. Let me just show you a few clips from our previous videos where we showcase an A3 Ruby. From here, we have learned that the pacing of skill rotation is a bit slow and we cannot use Ruby as the main DPS. Her role mostly ended up doing debuff, buff, control, and deal some damage from time to time. I will put a link in the description if you want to check out the full video. Now, as we move to A5, this is where the turning point begins. And we can observe that it is not anymore about the damage like in A1 or A3. Here, her charging becomes super crazy even with only 8.0 charge stats. She also gains 25% additional shatter. Overall, with this fast charging, she is now fit to be the on-field DPS. This also paves the way for her to unlock a very deadly combination with King's Discharge into the Shatter with 15 seconds burn from A1 and then instantly back into a massive Ruby Discharge. This technique heavily exploits the ignite mechanics of Ruby. Although this was also possible with other on-field DPS, it was not as fast and as good as Ruby at A5. Moreover, we also need Ruby to gain stacks from the flame attack buffs. So now at A5, she can now begin to become a true on-field DPS. And with that, the option for third weapon will have more flexibility. It now has an open slot for a variety of roles. For example, you can now put a buffer like Claudia, Tsubasa, Zero, or even a Nemesis. Basically, someone who can still be useful even if they're not on the field all the time. Or probably even another damage dealer with charge like Huma or a Cobalt B with burn. Now you might be wondering, what is Ruby's shatter bonus for? Well, personally, I think it can be used directly to shatter, of course, but I do believe that it is a supplemental buff for you and the shatter weapon you use. For example, there will be times wherein King cannot shatter the enemies fast enough because the skill cooldown is long. In this case, you can continuously hit the enemies with Ruby just a bit for King's discharge to quickly shatter the shield. Or in the case of boss fights where the shield is so high, you kinda don't want to keep on using normal attacks with King. Finally, at A6, she receives her final form wherein I believe she can already be everything with additional damage, faster buff acquisition, and less cooldown for quicker skill rotation, and an even better exploitation of the ignite mechanics through her skill. For the matrices, sometimes they have special effects that give us a bit of idea on how a character is intended to be played. For Ruby's case, her matrices mostly only supplement what she already has. It's still quite nice though, because the 15 seconds cooldown kinda matches the 16 seconds skill cooldown at A6. This is just one of the many ways to approach the game. It may or may not work for you. Nonetheless, I hope that I have given you some information that can at least help you build the best team that will work for you. Let me just share you my personal take on Ruby. First, Ruby is not as simple as straightforward as some would say. At A5 or A6, that could be true, because there she's almost a complete package. But below that, I believe that it would require careful planning and better understanding of Ruby. Even the gameplay itself is not so simple. To optimize damage output, it requires good timing, decision making, and a well-optimized skill rotation. One example of that is how to take advantage of her ignite mechanics. This part of her is what makes her gameplay interesting. As for my review and recommendation based on my experience, in the case of a Bygone Phantasm normal mobs floor, which we showed in this video as example, at A0 to A3, Ruby had issues when it comes to charging, and I found myself openly not having enough for a King discharge whenever I tried to use Ruby as the main DPS. So here I think Ruby will be more of a utility and a secondary DPS. I would recommend adding a weapon that can deal damage and charge at the same time, maybe a Huma, Cobalt, or some Mirror for non-flame options. A5, Ruby will be enabled as the main DPS dealing lots of damage and having insane charging. And so here, the composition will probably change. There can now be a safe slot for many types of roles and weapons. For example, you can use a Tsubasa for damage buff, a Nemesis for buffs, sustain, and damage from her towers. Of course, adding more damage will also be a great option, such as a Cobalt B or a Huma who can just use a high damage skill from time to time. Then what about joint ops? What about world boss fights, frontier clash? What's gonna be the best composition? Unfortunately, I'm not gonna be able to discuss all of them, but I do hope that I have at least given you a good starting point, because whatever team you're planning to build would also depend on your priority game content. So that's gonna be the end of this video. But before you go, I'm just curious, what composition do you have in mind for your Ruby? And what are your plans for her? Again, thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to like the video if you like the video and subscribe if you want to see more of these types of contents.